It was here from 1939 to 1945 that the largest women's concentration camp was located, which by the end of the war had become a real death camp. 130,000 people, most of them women, faced agony and horror in the walls of Ravensbruck. Construction of the camp began in 1939. The first 867 captives had to work on the expansion of the concentration camp, as well as to create an SS settlement. At first they were German political prisoners and prostitutes. A few months later, 440 gypsy women were brought to the camp. A little later, Poles, Czechs, and Austrians. Then women from the Netherlands, Yugoslavia, Norway, Luxembourg, and the Soviet Union. As in a number of other camps, medical experiments were carried out on women in Ravensbruck. Doctors, both male and female, promised the leadership of the Third Reich exceptional results in the field of transplantation and medical tests that will make soldiers stronger in the future. Most often, Poles were chosen for experiments. Many died in the process. The survivors were shot. Experiments with bones, muscles, and nerves were carried out in Ravensbruck. As a result of operations, large growths appeared in women, which were very painful and remained for life. Sanitary standards were observed only at first. I was lucky. We had operations at the very beginning using clean bandages. When the operations were on stream, no one followed the sanitation. Bandages were used repeatedly. As a result, people developed infections, recalls one of the prisoners. Gynecologist Karl Klauberg wanted to create a fast and cheap method of sterilization. Based on Nazi ideology, representatives of the lower race had to do slave work but not reproduce. At least 160 girls were subjected to the experiment. Everyday life in the camp was also not easy. When the women first arrived at the camp, they were undressed right on the street, then sent to the gynecologist. All clothes and personal belongings were taken away. Instead of them, a striped robe and wooden shoes. In summer, prisoners got up at 3:30 in the morning and started slave labor. There was a short break in the afternoon, then the work continued until the evening. In Ravensbruck, women had to sew clothes for all prisoners of the Third Reich and the Nazis themselves. There was an enterprise for textile and leather production. In 1942, the German electrotechnical concern Siemens and Halske AG erected 20 barracks for forced labor. By 1943, the camp was overcrowded, and no hygiene and sanitation rules were observed anymore. I had to make my way through the crowd to get to the toilet or to the wash basins. An exception was made only for women who were sent to work in brothels. They were sheared, fed, and dressed better. Brothels were opened on the territory of men's concentration camps in order to increase labor productivity. And it was Ravensbruck who was the main supplier of prostitutes. Most often, German, Polish, and French women were selected. At first, the women were promised release from the concentration camp after 6 months of working in a brothel. For many, the desire to be free was stronger than moral principles. Before being sent to a brothel, the girls were put in proper shape. They injected calcium, brushed their teeth and skin, bathed in disinfectant baths, fattened, and left to sunbathe under quartz lamps. According to the developed standard, 1 woman for 500 men. One session lasted 15 minutes. The guards watched what was happening through a peephole. Before you continue watching, please subscribe to my channel and like it. Of course, this is optional. The main thing is to be sincere. Men, on the other hand, did not deprive themselves of pleasure and never refused such a way of encouragement, knowing full well that women in brothels are prisoners like them. When women could not work or got sexually transmitted diseases, they were sent back to the camp, where they died. Despite all this, the position of a prostitute in a concentration camp was considered prestigious by many prisoners. After the war, some of the women who survived the brothels were stigmatized and ostracized by their communities, despite having been victims of horrific crimes. It was not until decades later that their stories were brought to light and recognized as part of the larger history of the Holocaust. I was 18 and I didn't even know what a brothel was, but there I had my first adventure. I already knew this young woman. Her name was Frida. She was 6 years older than me, so for me she was already an adult woman. She said to me, "Well, let's have a rest, smoke a cigarette." I've never smoked. Everything happened by itself. Later I asked my mother to send me 25 marks from home. One visit cost 2 marks. I went to her 12 times. The Dutchman Albert van Dyck recalled about his first experience in a brothel. When I went to the brothel, I didn't know anything. She asked me, "Have you ever slept with a woman?" It was my first time, and, of course, I liked it. Later I tried to get to this prostitute again, but the brothel did not work all the time. Sometimes it was necessary to clean up there. Women got sick or got pregnant. Once I climbed in the window and spent 2 hours with her, another prisoner described his experience. Due to forced sterilization, women did not get pregnant often. In most cases, they were immediately sent for a forced abortion. Only German women were allowed to give birth. That is why more than 600 children were born in Ravensbruck in a few years. The women had to return to work in a week and could only see the babies during the break. One of the unique expositions of Ravensbruck is the House of SS Führers. Only 54 SS officers are known to have worked in Ravensbruck with the rank of Führers. What made them perform this service, and why did the Germans dream of marrying them? Unlike ordinary citizens, the Führers received houses that were chic for that time, absolutely free of charge, even if they were near a concentration camp. The house where the first commandant of Ravensbruck, Max Kegel, and his wife lived is on display. On the ground floor there is a lobby with a fireplace, 2 rooms, a kitchen with a pantry, a toilet, and a corridor. On the second floor there is a bedroom, a children's room, a guest room, and a bathroom. The living area is slightly less than 150 meters. The house was equipped with central heating. The prisoners of the concentration camp landscaped the gardens of the Führer family, served their guests. The wives of such SS men were most often very educated women who believed that such a marriage would improve their living conditions. Within the framework of wartime, ordinary German women had to work at enterprises, but not the wives of the Führers. They were allowed to take care of children and everyday life. In 1943, a crematorium was built in Ravensbruck. From that moment it turned into a real death camp, and in 1944, the camp command received an order to destroy all sick, old, and inoperable prisoners. A male prisoner climbed onto the roof and threw a gas canister into the cell through the hole, which he immediately closed. I heard crying. After 2 or 3 minutes, everything fell silent. I cannot say whether the women were dead or unconscious, because I was not present when the cell was cleaned. This is how Assistant Commandant Schwarzhuber described the execution process. The conditions in Ravensbruck were notoriously harsh, and thousands of women died from hunger, disease, and inhumane treatment. The liberation of Ravensbruck was the result of the Soviet Army's advance towards Berlin during the final stages of World War II. As the Soviet Army pushed towards the German capital, they encountered a network of concentration and extermination camps where millions of innocent people had been imprisoned and killed. On April 27, 1945, the Soviet Army reached the outskirts of Ravensbruck and began their assault on the camp. The Nazi guards at Ravensbruck were well aware that the Soviet Army was approaching, and they attempted to evacuate the camp by forcing the prisoners on a death march to the north. However, many prisoners were too weak to walk, and the guards simply shot anyone who could not keep up. When the Soviet Army arrived, they found thousands of women who were emaciated, sick, and barely alive. The Soviet soldiers quickly organized medical care and food for the prisoners, which undoubtedly saved countless lives. Most of the officers, guards, and wardens of this concentration camp joined German society again after 1945 and were never held accountable for their service in Ravensbruck. Some of them are still missing. Thank you for watching this video.